Victoria Hale signed the merger that fired 200 people on a Tuesday morning and didn't flinch once. But standing in a stranger's kitchen at 11 p.m., watching his 6-year-old daughter sleep on the couch with crayon marks still on her fingers. Victoria's hand wouldn't stop shaking. She had controlled boardrooms. She had silenced shareholders. She had never not once let anything catch her off guard. And yet, a worn-out apartment, a tired man she barely knew, and a little girl who left sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Daddy, don't forget to smile today," was undoing her in ways no quarterly report ever could. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it gets you, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The night it all started, James Calloway was elbow deep in a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink when his phone rang. He didn't answer it. He was 41 years old, had a 6-year-old daughter named Lily asleep in the next room, and exactly 14 minutes before he needed to have the water back on, so he could wash the dinner dishes before tomorrow became today. A ringing phone at 10:47 p.m. on a Wednesday was not in the plan. The plan was everything to James. Wake at 5:45. Pack Lily's lunch before she woke up, because if she caught him doing it, she'd insist on adding gummy bears to her sandwich again. Drop her at school by 7:30. Be at the Hale Industries distribution hub by 8 o'clock. Survive the 10 hours of freight coordination inventory discrepancies and junior staff who still couldn't read a manifest correctly. Pick Lily up, feed her, bathe her, read to her, get her down by 8:30. Then sit at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and stare at spreadsheets until his eyes gave out. Repeat. That was life. That was his life. And he had made a kind of peace with it. Not the warm, contented peace people talked about, but the survival kind. The kind a man builds brick by brick so the wind doesn't get in. His phone rang again. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and looked at the screen. R. Yates Corp. Admin. Richard Yates was the director of corporate administration at Hale Industries. The man had called James exactly twice in 3 years, both times, about benefits enrollment deadlines. James stared at the screen, then picked up. Calloway. James? Yates sounded like he hadn't slept in 2 days. I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no. James leaned against the counter. Go ahead. You know we've had the security assessment running on the executive floors this week. Yeah, there was a memo. What the memo didn't say. Yates continued lowering his voice like someone might be listening. Is that the assessment flagged the executive penthouse Miss Hale's residence as non-compliant. There's a structural issue with the ventilation system. Company engineers found traces of carbon monoxide buildup in 3 rooms. It's not at a dangerous level yet, but they can't let her stay there, James said. They can't let her stay there. And the building also pulled permits for a full renovation starting Monday. So even after they fix the gas issue, the entire top floor is under construction for 6 weeks. James waited. She needs somewhere to stay, James, temporarily. We've gone through the list. The corporate suite at the Meridian is booked through a conference. The backup unit in Riverside is being rewired, and Miss Hale has... Yates paused carefully. Miss Hale has declined a hotel. She says she won't work effectively from a hotel room for 6 weeks. Okay, James said slowly. What does this have to do with me? A beat of silence. You live 8 minutes from the office. You have a 2-bedroom unit we have that on file from when you submitted for the child care proximity benefit. And you're... Yates stopped. I'm what Richard... You're the most discreet person in this building, James. Everyone knows that. You don't gossip. You don't talk about work at home. And you don't talk about home at work. She needs someone who can maintain confidentiality without being told to. James laughed. It came out short and humorless. You're asking me to let my CEO live in my apartment. Temporarily. With my 6-year-old daughter. I know how it sounds. Do you... James? Yates's voice dropped again. She asked for you specifically. That stopped him. He stood in the middle of his kitchen in a damp shirt and said nothing for a long moment. Why me? She didn't say. She just looked at the list, crossed off names, and said Calloway. That was it. James looked at the hallway. Lily's door was half open, the little nightlight casting a soft orange glow across the floor. There was a drawing taped to the outside of her door, a lopsided house with a yellow sun, a man with a rectangle for a head, and a tiny girl with what appeared to be wings. He'd asked her once what the wings were for. She'd said, "That's me flying to school so I'm not late, Daddy." He rubbed his eyes. "What's the arrangement financially? Hale Industries covers a full month's rent regardless of how long she stays, plus a weekly stipend for household expenses. And I want to be clear, this is entirely voluntary. If you say no, we go back to the list and figure something else out. No professional consequence. None." James looked at the ceiling. He thought about the transmission in his car that had been grinding for 2 months. He thought about Lily's spring field trip deposit that was due next Friday. He thought about the overtime that had disappeared when they restructured the logistics team last fall. "She has rules," he said. "I'm guessing." "She does. I'll send them over tonight." "Send them now. I'll read them and call you back in 20 minutes. Yates exhaled with obvious relief. "Thank you, James. I haven't said yes yet." He hung up. The rules arrived in his inbox 4 minutes later. They were formatted like a corporate memo. He was not surprised. Temporary Residence Guidelines, Executive Relocation Protocol. 5 Hale/J. Calloway. Residence 1. Professional distance shall be maintained at all times within the shared residence. 2. No discussion of company operations, personnel, or executive decisions in casual settings. 3. Shared spaces to be kept in professional order. Common areas not to be used after 10 p.m. unless by prior agreement. 4. Personal life of either party is not subject to discussion unless voluntarily offered. 5. This arrangement carries no change in professional hierarchy. Miss Hale remains employer. Mr. Calloway remains employee. 6. Arrangement is temporary. Duration not to exceed 6 weeks. James read them twice. He thought about Rule 5 for a long time. Then he called Yates back and said yes. She arrived the following evening with 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and an expression that made it clear she had not come to make friends. Victoria Hale was 34 years old and had been CEO of Hale Industries for 3 years. James had seen her in person maybe a dozen times. Quarterly all-hands meetings, 1 building walkthrough when she'd toured the distribution floor, and once in the elevator when she had been staring at her phone and he had pressed the lobby button for her without thinking, and she had glanced up and said, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like she was reading it off a card. She was 5'7", sharp-featured, and dressed even now at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, arriving at a stranger's apartment like she was walking into a board meeting. Dark blazer, hair pulled back, posture that said, "I am always the most competent person in this room, and I am doing you a favor by being here." James opened the door. They looked at each other. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Miss Hale." He stepped back. "Come in." She walked in, took one precise look around the apartment, the couch with its slightly worn armrest, the stack of Lily's library books on the coffee table, the crayon drawing of their apartment building that was taped to the refrigerator, and then turned back to him with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. "I appreciate the accommodation," she said. "I'll stay out of your way." "Same," James said. A small voice came from behind him. "Are you the lady from Daddy's work?" Lily had appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, the ones with the little astronaut bears on them, holding a stuffed rabbit named Gerald by one ear. She was studying Victoria Hale with the direct, unfiltered attention that only 6-year-olds and interrogating detectives can manage. Something shifted in Victoria's face. Just briefly. Like a program running a calculation it hadn't expected. "I am," Victoria said. "Do you have a rabbit?" Lily asked. "I don't. This is Gerald." Lily held him up. "He's scared of the dark, but he's working on it." Victoria looked at Gerald, then at Lily, then with what seemed like genuine uncertainty back at the rabbit. "That's very brave of him," she said. Lily nodded seriously. I know. She turned to James. Daddy, she can sit on the couch if she wants. I already moved my snacks. James caught something flicker across Victoria's face that he couldn't quite name. He pointed toward the hallway. Lily bed. I was just being polite. You can be polite in the morning. Go. Lily gave Victoria one more long look, the kind that children give to things they haven't made up their minds about yet, and then padded back down the hall. Good night, Gerald's scared lady, she called over her shoulder. There was a pause. Gerald's scared lady, Victoria repeated quietly. Not a question. Not a complaint. Just repeating it like she was locating it in some internal filing system that had no folder for it. She names everything, James said. Don't take it personally. I wasn't. Victoria turned back to him, and whatever small thing had cracked open in her expression was sealed again. If you can show me the room, I'll be out of the main space by 9. James showed her the room. She thanked him precisely and closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Miss Hale remains employer. Mr. Calloway remains employee. He went back to the kitchen and finished the dishes. The first week was in its own strange way almost manageable. Victoria woke before him. He'd come out at 5:45 to start coffee and find the kitchen already quietly occupied her laptop, open a black coffee already made her files spread in a precise pattern across the far end of the table. She worked like someone who didn't believe in interruption. So he made Lily's lunch at the other end of the counter without a word, and somehow it worked, the two of them moving around each other in the kitchen, like pieces of different puzzles that had learned to share a box. She said good morning exactly once each day. He said it back. That was enough. What he noticed and tried not to was the way she watched things. Not him specifically. More like the apartment, the life in it. He caught her looking at the sticky notes Lily left on the refrigerator. Lily had a habit of it. She'd started a few months ago after her teacher talked about leaving kind messages for people, and now there were little post-it notes all over the lower half of the fridge. Daddy, you are the best. Daddy, I love you more than pizza. Which was, Lily had explained, a very large amount. Daddy remembered to breathe today. That last one had gone up after a rough week in November. He didn't know how she'd known. He'd never told her. One morning he came out early and found Victoria standing at the refrigerator with her coffee reading the notes. Not touching them, just reading. She heard him and stepped back immediately like he'd caught her doing something she hadn't planned. Sorry, she said, which was a word he'd never heard her use in a meeting. I was just... She stopped. Your daughter writes these... Yeah. Victoria looked at the notes once more, then at her coffee. She's observant. More than is convenient, James said. You want eggs? She looked at him like he'd asked her to solve an equation in a language she'd never studied. You don't have to. I'm making them anyway, he said. You want some or not? A pause. Something in her jaw shifted. Yes, she said. Thank you. He made eggs. She sat at the table and closed her laptop for the first time since she'd arrived. They didn't talk much, but the silence was different than it had been the day before. By the end of the first week, she was eating dinner with them on Thursdays. Not because anyone had planned it. It had happened because Lily had set the table for 3 without asking, and James hadn't known how to unset it without making a thing of it, and Victoria had come out of her room at exactly the wrong moment, and Lily had said, "We're having pasta. Do you like pasta?" in a tone that suggested the correct answer was yes. Victoria had said yes. She sat across from Lily, who spent 15 minutes explaining completely unprompted the political situation among the stuffed animals in her room. James watched Victoria's face during this explanation, the way she listened with total seriousness, asked a precise follow-up question about whether Gerald and the stuffed elephant had resolved their earlier conflict, and nodded slowly when Lily reported that they had reached a peace treaty involving shared blanket rights. After dinner, when Lily had gone to brush her teeth, James was clearing plates, and Victoria was doing something he'd never seen her do in a week of living there. She was just sitting, No laptop, no phone, no files. Just sitting at the kitchen table in the quiet, looking at the refrigerator full of sticky notes. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But for the first time since she'd arrived, James noticed something. She didn't look like a CEO in someone else's apartment. She looked like a person who hadn't sat still in a very long time and didn't quite know what to do with it. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that on the other side of that quiet, Victoria Hale was thinking about a question she hadn't asked herself in years. When did I stop having a life that looked like this? Not a better life, not a worse life. Just a life. With dinner at a real table. With a child who gave things names and expected the world to listen. She had a penthouse. She had a driver. She had a calendar so full it had to be managed by 2 assistants. She did not have sticky notes on her refrigerator. She did not have anyone who told her in crayon to remember to breathe today. And sitting in James Calloway's kitchen on a Thursday night, listening to water run through old pipes and the distant sound of a little girl arguing with a toothbrush, Victoria Hale felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt like she was somewhere. Not somewhere important. Not somewhere powerful. Just somewhere real. She didn't know yet what to do with that. But the question had already started moving inside her, quiet at first, then louder, like water finding its way through something that had been sealed for too long. Why does this feel like something I'm not supposed to want? She didn't answer it. Not yet. She closed her eyes, sat in the quiet of someone else's ordinary life, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't reach for her phone. She started leaving her door open. It was a small thing. So small that James wasn't sure at first if it was intentional. The first night it happened, he figured she'd forgotten to pull it shut. The second night, he thought maybe the latch was loose. He made a mental note to check it. By the third night, when he walked past at 10:15, carrying a glass of water, and saw the thin line of light coming from the gap in her door, he stopped making excuses for it. She wasn't forgetting. She was listening. He didn't know to what exactly. The apartment at that hour wasn't offering much. The refrigerator hum, the occasional creak of the building settling Lily's small snoring from down the hall that James had long ago stopped hearing because it had become as natural as breathing. But Victoria was listening to all of it. He could feel it somehow through the door. The quality of silence that belongs to someone who is paying attention. He didn't say anything about it. He just walked past and went to bed. But he thought about it. The second week brought a shift that neither of them acknowledged directly, which was maybe the only way it could have happened at all. It started with Lily. Lily had decided with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old who has identified a mission that Victoria needed to be educated about certain things. Not in any formal sense, just that whenever Victoria appeared in the common areas, Lily would materialize within approximately 90 seconds and begin delivering information she had decided Victoria required. The information was varied. One evening, it was a detailed account of a conflict on the school bus involving someone named Marcus, who had stolen someone else's fruit snacks. Another time, it was a demonstration of how Gerald the rabbit could be posed to look like he was thinking. Once memorably, it was a 10-minute explanation of why the moon was following their car on the drive back from the grocery store, and what Lily had concluded from this, which was that the moon was lonely and should be given a name. I want to call it Stephen. Lily told Victoria at the kitchen counter while Victoria was trying to review a legal brief. Victoria looked up from her laptop. Why Stephen? Because it sounds like someone you could trust, Lily said, with the gravity of a philosopher. Victoria considered this for a long moment. Stephen is a solid choice. Lily beamed and ran back to her room. Victoria watched her go, then looked back at her screen. She didn't type anything for almost a full minute. James was at the sink with his back turned, but he heard it all. He didn't smile. He was careful not to, but something in his chest did a thing he hadn't planned for. The legal brief stayed unopened for the rest of the evening. What James was slower to notice because he was not by habit, Someone who tracked his own emotional terrain with any precision was that he had started looking forward to coming home. Not in the grand movie way, not with the kind of anticipation you could put words to. Just that somewhere in the second week, the drag he'd always felt in the parking lot at the end of a shift, the full-body exhaustion of a man trying to be enough for a child while also being enough for a job, had gotten fractionally lighter. He hadn't identified why until a Tuesday evening when he walked in and heard Victoria say from the kitchen, "Lily, that is not how fractions work, and if your teacher told you it was your teacher was oversimplifying." He stopped in the doorway. Lily was at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, and Victoria was standing next to her blazer, still on heels, still on looking for all the world like she had walked out of an executive meeting and straight into second-grade mathematics without breaking stride. "But Mrs. Hartley said," Lily started. "Mrs. Hartley is teaching you the shape of the concept," Victoria said, pulling out the chair beside Lily and sitting down with the purposefulness of someone about to chair a meeting. "I'm going to teach you why it works. There's a difference." Lily looked at her. "Are you smarter than Mrs. Hartley?" "In some things, yes. In others, certainly not. Now." Victoria picked up Lily's pencil. "Look at this." James stood in the doorway for another moment, briefcase still in hand, watching his CEO sit at his kitchen table and explain the foundational logic of fractions to his daughter using the back of a grocery receipt because there was no clean paper nearby. He put the briefcase down quietly and went to start dinner. He didn't announce himself. He didn't interrupt. He just cooked. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, and James was washing the last of the dishes, Victoria came and stood at the counter with her empty tea mug. She had started making tea in the evenings sometime in the middle of last week. He'd bought a second box without mentioning it and said almost carefully, "She understood it. The fractions. She got there." "She's sharp," James said. "She is." Victoria wrapped both hands around the mug. "She asks the actual question. Not the question she thinks she's supposed to ask. The real one." James glanced at her. "She does that. Most adults stop doing that." Victoria said it like she was talking about weather patterns. Observational, detached. But there was something underneath it that wasn't detached at all. "When did you stop?" James asked. He hadn't planned to say it. It just came out easy and direct, the way things come out when you've stopped being careful. Victoria looked at him. For a second, he thought she was going to recalibrate, go formal, remind him with some polite phrasing that they were keeping professional distance. But she didn't. She looked at the mug in her hands and said, "I don't remember," which is probably the answer. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. "I make coffee at 5:45 every morning," James said. "If you want some before you start, it's there." It wasn't an invitation to talk about feelings. It wasn't a moment. It was just a man telling a tired woman that the coffee would be ready. But Victoria's expression shifted in a way that suggested she understood it was more than that. "Thank you," she said, and this time it didn't sound like she was reading it off a card. The third week brought the first real argument. It was small, as arguments between people who are trying not to argue always are. Small and specific and sharp in the particular way that only happens when two careful people have gotten close enough to have a real disagreement. It was about Lily's schedule. James had a system, a detailed color-coded weekly chart on the refrigerator that mapped out Lily's meals, sleep times, homework windows, and the 30-minute free play slot that James had read in an article 18 months ago was developmentally important. The chart had been built over 2 years of single parenting and represented in some ways the scaffolding that kept everything from collapsing. Victoria had started quietly and without asking, improving it, not in a dramatic way. She'd mentioned once that Lily's reading window was poorly placed right after dinner when Lily's attention was at its lowest, and that moving it to right after school pickup would yield better retention. She'd been right, and James had moved it, and Lily had finished 2 books in a week for the first time since September. Then Victoria had mentioned that the Wednesday meal plan was nutritionally imbalanced, and James had said in a voice that was very level and very quiet, "I've been feeding her for 6 years." Victoria looked up from her laptop. I know that. She's healthy. She's happy. She's growing. I wasn't implying otherwise. Then what were you implying? She set the laptop down fully and looked at him with the directness she reserved he'd noticed for things she was completely certain about. I was implying that zinc and iron intake in children her age are easy to overlook without intending to, and that 2 substitutions on Wednesday would address it. That's all. That's all, James repeated. James. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Not Mr. Calloway. Not the careful professional distance of a surname. Just James. And the way she said it, not softened, not apologetic, just honest, made him stop. I'm not criticizing you. She paused, and in that pause, something shifted, and she looked almost surprised by what she was about to say. I'm paying attention. I don't always know how to do that without sounding like I'm running an audit. It's a problem I have. The fight didn't happen. Something else happened instead. James sat down at the kitchen table across from her. He put his hands flat on the table the way he did when he was working through something. Why are you paying attention? He asked. Not defensive, just genuinely asking. Victoria held his gaze for a moment. Because she matters, she said. And because you're... She stopped. She looked down at the table. When she looked back up, something in her had been stripped back a layer, and what was underneath was less the CEO and more something raw. You're doing something very hard, every day, without making it look like a burden. And I've been watching you do it, and I can't not notice it. James sat with that. He could have made it uncomfortable. He could have made it professional again. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's get back to our respective evenings. He knew how to do that. Instead he said, Wednesday is mac and cheese. Victoria blinked. Her favorite, he said. I can adjust the other days, but Wednesday is mac and cheese. That's not changing. Something crossed Victoria's face that was close to a smile and was more real for the fact that she seemed to be trying to suppress it and couldn't. Mac and cheese it is, she said. I'll add spinach, James said. That's all I was going to suggest. I know. He stood and went to pour himself a glass of water. I'm not always easy to help. No, Victoria agreed, and then quietly, neither am I. He handed her the water instead of his own glass without thinking about it and went to get another for himself. She took it without comment. But she didn't pick up her laptop again that night. What James was learning slowly, and without wanting to fully acknowledge it, was that Victoria Hale was not what he had assumed. He had assumed the way you assume things about powerful people who never explain themselves, that she was simply built differently. That the control, the precision, the absolute absence of visible exhaustion, even after 16-hour days, was just who she was. Some people are like that, he'd told himself. Some people don't have the cracks. But the cracks were there. He was just seeing them now because he was close enough. She pushed food around her plate when she was stressed, which was more often than she showed on the surface. She had a habit when she was thinking hard of pressing 2 fingers against her temple, just below the hairline. She kept her phone face down during dinner, not because she had put it away, but because she was making herself not look at it, which was different. She slept less than she should, and he knew this because her light was often still on at 2 in the morning, and she was always already up when he came out at 5:45, and the math didn't add up. One night he came out for water at 1:15 and found her sitting on the couch in the dark with her knees pulled up and her laptop closed in her lap. Not working, not sleeping, just sitting in the specific stillness of someone who has nowhere else to be in their own mind. He stopped. You should sleep, he said. Not a command, not advice, just an observation between 2 people who'd stopped pretending not to see each other. I know, she said. She didn't move. He went to the kitchen, got water, came back. He sat down on the far end of the couch, not close, just in the room, present. What is it? He asked. A long pause. The Whitmore merger, she said. The board is divided. I have 2 members who want to delay, 3 who want to accelerate, and 1 who wants to pull out entirely, and pretend we never looked at it. And you, I know what the right decision is, she said. I've known for 3 weeks, but knowing and having the room to execute are two different things. She turned her head to look at him. You ever know the right answer, but have to wait for everyone else to get there? He thought about it. Parent of a 6-year-old, he said. That's basically the entire job. She looked at him, and then she laughed. It wasn't her professional laugh, the brief polished acknowledgement of something witty in a meeting. It was a real one, short and unguarded and a little surprised at itself. James felt the sound of it land somewhere in his chest and stay there. Go to sleep, Victoria, he said. She looked at him. He'd used her first name. He hadn't planned to. She didn't correct him. She stood, picked up her laptop, and walked toward the hallway. At the entrance, she paused and turned back. The coffee at 5:45, she said. I've been relying on it more than I intended to. James nodded. I know. I just wanted to say so. She went to her room. He sat in the dark for a while longer, listening to the building settle, and Lily snoring quietly down the hall, and tried to locate the precise moment when temporary arrangement had started sounding like something else. He couldn't find it, which probably meant it had already happened before he started looking. The request came on a Friday morning, and it came the way most things Victoria did, directly without preamble, and with the implicit assumption that the logistics would be worked out. James was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into his travel mug when she came out of her room, already dressed, already composed, already fully Victoria Hale, in a way that still, after nearly 3 weeks, struck him as slightly remarkable. He had never once seen her look unfinished. He had never once seen her come out in the morning looking like she'd just woken up. He didn't know if she woke up at 4 to prepare, or if she simply didn't come apart the way other people did. He had started to suspect the latter. I need to ask you something, she said. She didn't sit down. She stood at the edge of the kitchen in a way that told him she had thought carefully about how to begin this. James capped his travel mug. Okay. The company's annual stakeholder dinner is next Thursday. You've seen it on the all-hands calendar. It's the Whitmore family event, the charitable component, spouses and partners in attendance. She paused. The board expects me to bring someone. He waited. 3 of the board members have been using my personal life as a talking point for the past 8 months. Specifically, the fact that I don't have one. It's a pressure campaign, subtle, technically deniable, but consistent. The implication is that I'm too isolated, too singular, that a woman in my position should have, she said the word with careful neutrality, stability. Someone beside her. James looked at her. They're questioning your leadership because you're not married. They're questioning whether I understand the company's values around family and community. She said it flat, which is a more sophisticated way of saying the same thing. The Whitmore merger depends on their vote. I can't afford to walk into that dinner without answering the question, and I can't afford to manufacture a relationship on short notice with someone I'd have to brief and trust, and... She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. I trust you. The kitchen was very quiet. You want me to go as your partner, James said. For one evening, a protective arrangement. Publicly, it gives the board nothing to work with. Privately, it costs you a Thursday night and requires you to wear a suit. She held his gaze. I would not ask if there was another option I was comfortable with. James set his travel mug down on the counter. He thought about the rules she had written up on the first night. Rule 5. Miss Hale remains employer. Mr. Calloway remains employee. He thought about how carefully she had structured the distance between them when this started, and how much of that structure had quietly come apart over 3 weeks without either of them formally acknowledging it. He thought about the Whitmore merger and the 6 board members who were carving up her authority with language that sounded polite. He thought about how she had said, I trust you, with the same voice she used when she said things she was absolutely certain about. Who would be there? He asked. Board members, senior partners, the Whitmore family representatives, a handful of press, controlled environment. One evening, cocktail hour through dinner, roughly 4 hours. And what's our story? Something in her posture shifted. Not much, she was too controlled for much, but enough. I've drafted a framework. How we met, how long we've been together, general reference points. I want to go through it with you tonight if you're available. Lily will be asleep by 8:30. Tonight, James said. Yes. He picked up his travel mug again, looked at her for a moment. I'll need to arrange someone for Lily. I've already contacted Mrs. Okafor across the hall. She said yes. Victoria stopped. Something crossed her face that was close to discomfort. I hope that wasn't overstepping. James stared at her. You called my neighbor. I wanted to make it easy to say yes. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up his keys. We'll go through it tonight, he said. 8:45. He left for work. He spent most of the drive in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping the door panel in the rhythm he fell into when something was sitting in his chest and hadn't found a name yet. I trust you. Not you're convenient. Not you're discreet. Those things were also true, but they weren't what she'd said. She had said, I trust you. He tapped the door panel and watched the road. That evening, after Lily was asleep and the apartment had gone quiet, he came out to find Victoria at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and 2 printed pages in front of her. She had changed out of her work clothes into something simpler, dark slacks, a gray pullover, and she looked in this light less like the woman from the elevator and more like someone who was tired in a real way and not trying to hide it. Sit, she said, and then caught herself. Please. James sat. She slid one of the printed pages across the table. He looked at it. It was a single-page, clean margins, structured like a briefing document. Framework, Callaway/Hale stakeholder. Dinner for reference only. Adapt naturally in conversation. How we met bookstore. Riverside District approximately 14 months ago. A recommendation that turned into a conversation. Duration 13 months together. Living arrangement recent due to renovation not yet public. Nature of relationship, private by mutual choice. He read through it. She watched him read. A bookstore, he said. It's neutral. It doesn't invite follow-up questions the way a work meeting would. What book? She blinked. What? If someone asks what book, what are we saying recommended it? She hadn't written that down. He could see her recalibrating. Something we'd both plausibly read. Tell me something you've actually read in the last 2 years that wasn't a financial report, he said. A pause. Then with something that might have been reluctant amusement. A biography of Robert Moses. Urban Planning and Infrastructure. James considered this. I read it too, 3 years ago. My brother gave it to me. She looked at him. Did you actually? Yeah. He slid the paper back slightly. We can use that. You recommended it. I'd been meaning to read it. That's real enough to talk about naturally. She picked up her pen and wrote it down. He watched her write in the precise, even hand she used for everything. 13 months, he said. Why 13 and not 12? 12 sounds chosen. 13 sounds like you actually counted. He nodded slowly. You've done this before. No. She said it without looking up from the page. But I understand how scrutiny works. People look for the round numbers, the 2 perfect answers. The real version is always slightly irregular. The real version, he said. She looked up. He wasn't challenging her. He was just turning the phrase over the way you turn something over when you're not sure what it's made of. The believable version, she corrected quietly. They went through the rest of it. Her brother's name. Whether his daughter would come up and how to handle it if she did what they called each other in public. She had written James and Victoria on the pad, and he looked at it and said, No one calls me James except my mother when she's unhappy with me. What do people call you? Jay. She wrote it down. Then she looked at it. Then she crossed out James and wrote Jay. And something about the way she did it deliberately with a small press of the pen made him look away at the refrigerator. They rehearsed for an hour. It was efficient and strange, and by the end it felt almost like a deposition. 2 people getting their facts straight for something that would be examined, except that somewhere in the middle of it, she had started talking about the bookstore they'd invented, And then she had changed a detail unprompted without explaining, and said they hadn't been near the biography section at all. Actually, they'd both reached for the same novel, a thriller, something with a blue spine, and they'd looked at each other over it, and that was how it started. James had looked at her. That's not what the framework says. The framework is a starting point. She was writing the new detail on the legal pad. This is better. It's more visual. People believe what they can see. You just rewrote the meeting story. I improved it. You improved our fake origin story. She stopped writing. She looked up at him across the kitchen table, and for a second, neither of them said anything, and the word fake hung in the air between them in a way that was slightly different than it had been when he said it. Go to sleep, Jay, she said. He stood. He gathered nothing, said nothing, walked toward the hallway. At the entrance, he stopped. What color was the spine? She didn't look up from the legal pad. Slate blue, she said, with white lettering. He went to bed. He did not sleep immediately. The dinner was at the Harlan Hotel, and James had worn the suit he kept for funerals and job interviews. He had not told Victoria this. She had looked at him when he came out of his room and said, "Good," which from her was the equivalent of a standing ovation. In the car, she was quiet. Her driver, a man named Thomas, who said nothing and knew everything, James suspected took them across the city, while Victoria reviewed something on her phone, and James looked at the passing lights and tried to locate whatever calm he'd apparently misplaced. You don't have to perform, she said without looking up from her phone. That's the mistake most people make. They perform and it reads as performance. Just be present. Respond to me. Let me lead in the work conversations, and don't disappear from the personal ones. I'm not going to disappear, James said. She looked up from her phone then. I know. She looked at him for a moment in the moving dark. I know you won't. Thomas pulled to the front of the hotel. The cocktail hour was already in motion when they walked in, and James had been in exactly 0 corporate events of this scale. So he spent the first 4 minutes cataloging the room with the same attention he brought to a new distribution floor, layout exits, clusters of people who was watching the door. Several people were watching the door. Several sets of eyes tracked to Victoria immediately and then moved to him, and he felt the weight of that assessment and let it pass through without reacting. Victoria took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and turned to him with the naturalness of someone who had done this 1,000 times and said quietly, "Board members at 10 o'clock. Reginald Marsh and his wife Carol. He's the delay vote. He'll come to us." How do you know? Because he always comes to me, she said. He likes to be the one who crosses the room. It makes him feel like he's setting the terms. And sure enough, within 90 seconds, a silver-haired man in a dinner jacket was moving toward them with his wife, hand extended, smile already deployed. Victoria. He shook her hand and looked at James with the specific interest of a man taking inventory. And who's this? Reginald Carroll, this is Jay. Victoria said it without any performance at all. No extra warmth, no manufactured softness. Just said it the way you say the name of someone who belongs beside you. He's been very patient with me through the renovation chaos. Carol Marsh smiled genuinely. Oh, that building project's been going on forever. Are you staying somewhere manageable? Very manageable, James said. Good coffee, good company. Victoria glanced at him sideways. He didn't look at her. Carol Marsh laughed and touched her husband's arm and said something about their own renovation 2 years ago, and they were off, the 4 of them, moving into the easy conversational territory of home projects and city contractors. And James noticed Reginald Marsh watching him with the calibrating attention of someone who had expected a different kind of man and was adjusting his model. James didn't explain himself. He didn't overtalk. He asked Carol about a painting on the wall behind them that she mentioned having noticed and listened to her answer. And when Reginald made a point about urban development in the city's North Corridor, James said quietly, "There's a piece on the Robert Moses model that maps that pretty well, actually, if you're interested in the infrastructure side." Reginald's attention sharpened. "Moses, you've read the Caro book. We both have," Victoria said. and there was something in her voice that was the first slightly imperfect thing she had said all evening. It wasn't overwarm. It wasn't theatrical. It was just true sounding. The way things sound when you're not deciding to say them. Reginald looked between them. Then he smiled in a way that was different from the first smile, less political, more human. "Hale, I have to say, you look—" He paused, searching. "Settled." Victoria held his gaze. "I am," she said. The word went into the air and stayed there. James felt it in his peripheral vision without looking at her. He took a slow sip of his water. The dinner itself moved the way those evenings do when they are well managed, efficiently, pleasantly, with the low hum of important people being professionally charming at each other. James sat beside Victoria and followed her lead the way she'd asked, and she moved through the room and the table with the precision he'd come to recognize as simply how she operated, and he watched her work and thought about how thoroughly exhausting it must be to always be that exact. Then something happened that wasn't in the framework. They were at the table mid-dinner talking with a couple across from them. The Whitmore family's representative, a man named Gordon, and his wife. And Gordon was telling a story about an early business failure and what it had cost him and what it had taught him. And it was a real story, the kind that has rough edges and doesn't resolve cleanly. And James, without thinking, reached over and put his hand over Victoria's on the table. He didn't know why he did it. She had not looked like she needed it. She had been composed, attentive, responsive. Nothing about her outward presentation suggested anything other than calm capability. But he had felt something, the very faint tension in the way she was holding herself. The microscopic tightening that he had learned over 3 weeks of living in close quarters with this woman was what Victoria did instead of showing that something had touched her. And his hand had moved before he'd cleared it with his brain. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over under his. Not a performance. There were no eyes on them. In that specific moment, Gordon was still talking. Carol Marsh was listening. Nobody was watching. It was just what her hand did. His thumb moved once across her knuckle. She exhaled. It was almost inaudible. Gordon finished his story. The table responded. The moment dissolved back into dinner party territory, and James withdrew his hand and picked up his fork, and Victoria said something precise and thoughtful to Gordon about risk tolerance in early-stage ventures, and the evening continued. But in the space between that moment and the next words, James had understood something that he had not until that instant let himself understand. This was not going to end when the penthouse renovation was finished. Not because of an arrangement or a rule or a framework on a legal pad. Because of the way her hand had turned over. Because of the exhale. Because of the color of a book spine that neither of them had ever actually touched. Slate blue-white lettering that she had invented for a fake story, and somehow made more real than the actual facts. He ate his dinner. He did not look at her directly for the rest of the meal. But when they were leaving, when Thomas brought the car around and the cool night air hit them outside the hotel, and Victoria was quiet in the specific way she got when she had felt more than she'd intended to, James said nothing. He just walked beside her to the car. And she didn't recalibrate to her side of the seat. She sat close, not touching, but close. Closer than the space required. Neither of them mentioned the hand. The city moved past the windows, and the framework on the legal pad with all its careful, irregular details and its slate blue book spine was already miles behind them. Thomas dropped them at the building at 11:14. James knew the exact time because he looked at his phone when the car stopped, a reflex the same one he used to check whether he had enough time to do one more thing before Lily needed something. 11:14. Mrs. Okafor would have had Lily asleep by 8:30. The apartment would be quiet. He held the door for Victoria because it was a habit and not a performance, and she walked through without acknowledging it because accepting it had also become a habit, and they rode the elevator up in silence. Not the silence of the first week. That silence had been careful, structured. Two people maintaining the professional distance that had been written into a memo. This was different. This was the silence of two people who had just spent 4 hours pretending to be something and were now standing in the elevator trying to locate the seam between what was real and what wasn't, and finding it harder than expected. Victoria's heels clicked twice on the elevator floor as she shifted her weight. James watched the numbers go up. Mrs. Okafor met them at the door. Said everything was fine, said Lily. Had asked for a glass of water at 9 and then gone back to sleep. Immediately said the leftover pasta in the fridge was hers if they wanted it, and left with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has no idea what kind of evening she has just served as anchor to. The apartment was quiet. James loosened his tie in the hallway and went to check on Lily, a reflex as automatic as breathing, the same way he had checked every night for 6 years without deciding to. She was asleep on her side. Gerald tucked against her ribs, the nightlight casting its orange glow across her face. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he pulled the door to and went back to the kitchen. Victoria was standing at the counter with her back to him, still in her dinner clothes, both hands flat on the countertop, looking at the refrigerator. Not at anything specific on it. Just at it. At the sticky notes probably, though from here he couldn't be sure. He came into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, set one on the counter beside her without a word. She didn't take it immediately. Reginald Marsh came to find me at the end of the dinner, she said. She was still looking at the refrigerator. Before we left, he pulled me aside. James waited. He said, she paused and he could hear her deciding how to frame it. He said that I seemed different, that he hadn't expected. Another pause. He said he was going to recommend to the other delay vote that they move forward with the Whitmore merger on the original timeline. He said it without any qualification. That's what you needed, James said. Yes. She finally picked up the water glass, held it without drinking. He said one other thing. What? She turned around. She looked at him with the expression she got when she had been thinking about something for a long time and had reached the edge of where thinking could take her alone. He said, whoever he is, he looks at you like you're the only person in the room. Men don't fake that. The kitchen was very quiet. James put his water glass down on the counter slowly. Reginald Marsh, he said. Who's been on the board for 20 years? 23, Victoria said. He said that. He said that. James looked at the counter. He was aware that he was about to say something that would change the shape of this conversation, and he was trying to decide whether the shape needed to change. Whether it was better to leave it contained, to take the professional win, to absorb the evening into the category of mission accomplished, and let the framework hold. Then Victoria said quietly, "Why does this feel real?" He looked up. She was not looking at him now. She was looking at the glass in her hands, and she said it the way you say a thing when you've been carrying it for hours and it finally gets too heavy to carry silently. Not a question aimed at him exactly. More like something she'd been arguing with herself about and had finally said out loud by accident. Victoria. He said her name the way she had said his that night 3 weeks ago in the kitchen. Not softened, not careful, just honest. She looked up. Which part? He asked. She set the glass down. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the counter, and he recognized that too. It was the thing she did with her hands when she was thinking through something she hadn't cleared for herself yet. At the dinner, she said. I changed the story. You know I changed it. The bookstore. The bookstore. The novel. The blue spine. She shook her head slightly. None of that was in the framework. I rewrote it in the car on the way there, and I told myself it was because it was more convincing, more visual, but... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I know why I changed it. I just don't have a professional category for the reason. James leaned back against the counter. He folded his arms, not defensively, just to have something to do with his hands. Tell me anyway. The framework version was correct, she said. It was logically constructed, it covered the necessary details, it was defensible under scrutiny. She looked at him. But it didn't feel like us. And She stopped again, harder this time. I rewrote it because I wanted it to feel like us. which is insane because there is no us. There's an arrangement. There are rules I wrote. There is a professional hierarchy that has not changed. You turned your hand over, James said. She went very still. At the table. When I put my hand over yours, nobody was watching. Gordon was still talking. No one needed that for the performance. He held her gaze. But you turned it over. She didn't answer immediately. He watched her process it the way she processed hard things, by going very quiet and very precise in her stillness, like a machine finding its calibration. I know, she finally said. It came out stripped of everything professional. Just 2 words, plain and exposed. James unfolded his arms. He stood up straight. He moved through what he was about to say the way he moved through hard logistics problems, methodically, without flinching, because flinching never solved anything. I stopped tracking the line about 3 weeks ago, he said. I don't mean the arrangement rules. I mean the line between what's work and what's not. I stopped being able to find it. She looked at him carefully. When? He thought about it. Genuinely. He owed her that. The night you explained fractions to Lily using a grocery receipt. I stood in the doorway and I thought... He paused. I thought she didn't have to do that, and that mattered to me. More than it should have. Victoria was very still. And then, he continued, you sat at this table and ate pasta with us on a Thursday and listened to my daughter explain the geopolitical situation of her stuffed animal collection. And you asked a follow-up question about the blanket treaty, and it wasn't performance. You were actually... He stopped. You were actually there. Something moved through Victoria's face that was not, for once, under her control. I haven't been actually there, she said quietly, in a very long time. Anywhere. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Lily made a small sound in her sleep, and then was quiet again. James looked at the woman standing in his kitchen at 11:30 at night, in the clothes she'd worn to a dinner, where she'd held his hand and pretended to belong to him, and thought about how the pretending had felt easier than it should have, and how that was maybe not the warning sign he'd been calling it. The renovation finishes in 3 weeks, he said. Yes. Her voice was careful. And the arrangement ends. That was the agreement. He nodded slowly. Is it what you want? She looked at him. The question landed somewhere visible. He could see it in the way her breath changed the slight parting of her expression, like a door opening a crack. I don't know how to want things that aren't in a plan, she said. And it came out honest in a way that cost her. He could see what it cost her. You wanted the spinach and the mac and cheese, he said. She blinked. And you wanted the blue spine instead of the biography. You knew what you wanted. You just didn't ask permission first. He looked at her steadily. You don't need a plan to want something, Victoria. You need to stop requiring yourself to justify it before you feel it. Her jaw worked. She looked at the counter, then back at him. This is complicated. I know. The hierarchy. I know. If this becomes something and then it doesn't work, I know. He said it gently but without apology. I have a 6-year-old daughter who has started leaving your tea bags on your side of the counter because she noticed you ran out and didn't want to ask. I know complicated. Victoria looked at him sharply. She did that 2 days ago. She reorganized the whole tea shelf. He paused. She didn't tell me. I just noticed. Victoria looked away. She pressed her lips together in the specific way that meant she was holding something in that wanted out. She's 6 years old, she said, and it came out unsteady in a way that none of her corporate positions or board arguments or merger decisions ever sounded. Yeah, James said. And she... Victoria stopped. She turned back to face him, and something in her had shifted, something foundational, and her voice when it came was lower and stripped and real. She sees me. She's 6 years old, and she sees me. Not the CEO, not the building, just... She stopped again harder. I don't know what to do with that. She sees everyone, James said. That's who she is. I know, Victoria looked at the sticky notes on the refrigerator. At the bottom of the collection, slightly newer than the others, slightly lower on the door, low enough that you'd only see it if you were looking, there was a note that James hadn't put up. He hadn't noticed it until right now. He followed her gaze. He crossed the kitchen and read it. Tori, don't forget you are nice and smart, and we like you here. His throat tightened. He hadn't seen Lily write it. He didn't know when she'd put it up. She had given Victoria a nickname sometime in the last week without announcing it, and apparently decided that was settled. He turned around. Victoria was crying, not performing grief. Not the kind of emotion that gets managed. Just crying. Standing in his kitchen at 11:30 at night, with her hands at her sides and tears moving quietly down her face, and she didn't try to stop them, and didn't apologize for them, and didn't reach for the professional composure that would have covered it. She just let them happen. James crossed the kitchen. He didn't think about it. He put his arms around her. She went still for 1 second, the held breath second of someone who hadn't been held in a very long time, and had forgotten what to do with the weight of another person's presence. And then she leaned into it. Not dramatically, just leaned. Like something that had been standing rigid, finally found something solid enough to rest against. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that the moment wasn't already saying. She put one hand against his chest. Just held it there. After a while, she said into the fabric of his jacket, "I'm going to get mascara on your suit." "It's my funeral suit," he said. "It can handle it." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. They stood there in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she pulled back. Not away, just back to where she could look at him. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, which was the most un-Victoria thing he had ever seen her do, and it was somehow the most Victoria thing as well. Because she didn't look for a tissue or turn away to compose herself. She just dealt with it directly, immediately, the way she dealt with everything. "I've been watching you," she said. "Since before this. Since before the arrangement." He waited. "At the distribution floor walkthrough, 14 months ago, you were coordinating 3 teams simultaneously, and there was a manifest discrepancy, and you caught it before anyone else, and corrected it without making anyone feel stupid for missing it." She looked at him. "I noticed." "I was doing my job," James said. "You were doing your job with a kind of," she chose the word carefully, "steadiness, that I didn't see anywhere else in the building. In any building." She held his gaze. "I put you on the relocation list on purpose, Jay. It wasn't a random selection." He looked at her. "Yates told me you asked for me specifically," he said. "Yes. You said you needed someone discreet." That was true. It was also incomplete. She didn't look away. "I wanted to know if you were real, if what I'd seen from a distance was actually what was there, or if I'd constructed something. And," she looked at him for a long moment. "You're more than what I constructed," she said, "which is inconvenient and significant, and not something I know exactly what to do with yet." James held her gaze. He thought about the framework on the legal pad. He thought about Rule 5. He thought about the elevator on the first night, and the fractions on the grocery receipt, and the hand turning over under his at a dinner table while Gordon finished a story. He thought about Lily reorganizing the tea shelf without being asked. "You don't have to know what to do with it tonight," he said. "I know," she said. And she sounded for the first time since he'd met her like someone who was not already 3 steps ahead of the moment she was in. Like someone who was just in it. He stepped back, giving her space. She didn't move immediately. "The coffee is at 5:45, he said. "Like always." She looked at him. Her eyes were still bright. Her mascara was done. Her posture impossibly was already finding its way back to the version of her that stood straight. But the thing behind her eyes was different now. It wasn't managed. It was just open. "Like always," she said. She went to her room. He stood in the kitchen for a long time after leaning against the counter, looking at Lily's note on the refrigerator. "Tori, don't forget you are nice and smart, and we like you here." He thought about the word here. The specific physical, unambiguous weight of it. Not "I like you." not "you are welcome." But we like you here, as in this place, in this kitchen, in this life. Lily had said it in crayon on a yellow post-it note with her 6-year-old spelling, and she had said it more precisely than anyone with a legal pad and a framework and 2 printed pages of carefully structured talking points had managed to say anything all evening. James pushed off the counter and went to bed. He did not sleep immediately. He lay in the dark and thought about the last time he had felt something settle rather than tighten. The last time something had stopped being a problem to manage and had just become real. Part of the structure. Something you planned around without deciding to. He thought about 3 weeks becoming an anchor instead of an arrangement. He thought about the seam between pretending and meaning it, and how long ago it had dissolved, and how neither of them had said anything, because saying something would have made it a decision, and not saying anything had made it something quieter and more permanent than a decision. It had made it a fact. He turned over, closed his eyes. Down the hall in the room that had started as a spare and had become something else. Without announcement, the light stayed on for another 40 minutes. He knew because he was still awake when it finally went off. And even after it did, the question she had asked in the kitchen was still moving through the apartment like something that had been let out of a closed space and wasn't going back in. Why does this feel real? He knew the answer. He suspected she did too. The only thing left was saying it out loud in the daylight, with nowhere to hide and no framework to hold on to. That part was coming. The next morning she was already at the table when he came out at 5:45. Not working. That was the first thing he noticed. The laptop was closed. The legal pad was gone. She was sitting with both hands around her coffee mug. His coffee already made the pot still warm, and she was looking at the window the way people look at things when they are not actually seeing them. James stopped in the kitchen doorway. She heard him and turned. Her eyes were clear. She had slept. He could tell more than usual, which surprised him. She looked like someone who had put something down in the night and woken up without the weight of it. "I made enough for 2, she said. He came into the kitchen and poured his cup. He sat down across from her, not at the end of the table where he usually sat to keep a professional margin, but across, direct. He put his mug down and looked at her. "How long have you been up?" he asked. "An hour." She looked at her coffee. "I was thinking." "About the merger." "No." She looked up. "About what I said last night. What you said." She held his gaze with the steadiness he'd come to understand was not coldness, but the opposite, the way Victoria held herself still when something mattered enough that she was afraid to move wrong. "I want to finish the conversation." "Okay," he said. "I've spent the last—" She paused, measured. "The last 12 years building something that has no room in it for error. Not because I wanted a life without room, because every time I left room, something came in and used it against me. The board, the press, the people who decided that a 34-year-old woman running a company was a provisional arrangement until something more traditional took over." She set her mug down. "I stopped leaving room." James listened. "And then I ended up in your apartment," she said, "with your sticky notes and your Thursday pasta and your daughter who names the moon and reorganizes tea shelves for people she's known for 3 weeks. She looked at him. "And I don't know how to explain what happened to the architecture. I built it carefully. It held for 12 years. And in 3 weeks it just—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers to the edge of the table. "It didn't collapse. That's not what happened. It's more like I looked up one morning and realized I was standing outside it, and I didn't remember walking out." James turned his mug in his hands. "The architecture was always the problem," he said. She looked at him. "You built it to keep things out," he said. "But the things that were already inside you built it around those too. And they've been in there the whole time looking for a door." She was very still. "You changed the bookstore story," he said. "You didn't have to. Nobody needed it. But some part of you wanted it to be the kind of story that happened to real people, and so you made it one." He looked at her steadily. "That part of you has been there the whole time. It just hasn't had anywhere to go." Victoria looked at the table. When she looked back up, her voice was lower and more careful than he'd heard it. I don't know how to do this halfway. I don't have a halfway setting. If I let this be real. She stopped. If I let this be real, I'm all the way in. And all the way in means... She looked at him. It means Lily. It means your life. It means the complications of what I am in relation to what you are professionally, which neither of us can entirely erase. No, James said, we can't erase it. And that doesn't... She hesitated. That doesn't concern you. Of course it concerns me. He said it plainly. I have a daughter who has already decided she has feelings about you. I have a job in a building where you are the highest authority. I have a life that runs on a schedule and doesn't have a lot of margin for things falling apart. He looked at her. And none of that changes what I already know. What do you already know? He leaned forward slightly, put both hands flat on the table the way he did when he was certain. That the last 3 weeks are the first time in a long time that coming home felt like something I was moving toward instead of something I was holding together. He held her gaze. And that the difference is you. The kitchen was completely still. Victoria looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He let her. He had learned that she needed the space to arrive at things at her own pace, that pushing her toward a feeling was like trying to rush a calculation, it just produced the wrong answer. Then she said quietly, the renovation finishes in 18 days. I know. And she paused. I've been looking at the penthouse plans, the new layout. She looked at the table. It's very large and very quiet, and there are no sticky notes anywhere. James said nothing. He waited. I've been thinking, she said carefully, that I don't want to go back to it the way I left it. She looked up. I'm not saying I know what the alternative looks like. I'm not saying I have a plan. I'm saying... She stopped. Something moved across her face that was not managed, not composed, just open and a little scared, and more honest than anything she'd said at any dinner, or board meeting, or professional exchange in 12 years. I'm saying I don't want the arrangement to end, and that's the first thing I've wanted without a plan attached to it in longer than I can remember. James sat with that. Then he stood up, took his mug to the counter, and turned back to face her. Then it doesn't end, he said. Simply. Like it was a logistics problem that had just been solved. Like it was a manifest discrepancy that had been caught and corrected before it became a crisis. She looked at him. Something in her was waiting for the qualification, for the but, for the conditions and the framework and the professional distance memo version 2. Just like that, she asked. No, he said, not just like that. It's going to be complicated and careful, and we're going to have to figure out the professional piece deliberately, and Lily is going to have opinions about everything, and some of them will be inconvenient. He looked at her steadily. But those are logistics. I'm good at logistics. She looked at him for a long moment. And then something happened to Victoria Hale's face that James had seen only once before the night in the kitchen when she'd cried over a post-it note that a 6-year-old had put at the bottom of his refrigerator. The managed surface came apart. Not dramatically. Just parted. Like a coat someone finally takes off after wearing it too long. I'm not good at this, she said. And she meant all of it, the openness, the not knowing, the having something to lose. I know, James said. You're good at everything else. We'll figure out the ratio. She made the sound again, the one that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. Closer to a laugh this time. The sound of Lily waking up came from down the hall. The small shuffle of feet, the drag of Gerald along the floor. The particular rhythm of a 6-year-old who woke up the same way every morning with total commitment to being awake. The door opened. Lily appeared in the hallway in her astronaut bear pajamas, hair completely horizontal on one side, Gerald hanging from her hand. She looked at James. Then she looked at Victoria. Then she looked at the two of them sitting at the kitchen table at 5:50 in the morning, which was not a thing Victoria had ever done before, not in 3 weeks, not once. Lily processed this with the solemn attention she brought to all new data. Are you staying for breakfast? she asked Victoria. Victoria glanced at James. He said nothing. Gave her nothing. Let it be hers. Yes, Victoria said. If that's all right. Lily nodded, as though this were the most logical conclusion to an obvious sequence of events. I want pancakes, she announced to the room in general, and climbed into her chair at the table. James went to get the flour. Victoria sat at the table across from Lily, and Lily placed Gerald on the table facing Victoria with the ceremonial gravity of a formal introduction and said, Gerald says good morning. Victoria looked at Gerald. She looked at Lily. She said with perfect seriousness, Tell Gerald good morning from me. Lily leaned toward the rabbit and whispered something. Then she leaned back. He says you can sit here any time. I'll remember that, Victoria said. James made pancakes. The three of them ate at the kitchen table, with morning light coming through the window, and Lily talked about a dream she'd had involving a school bus and a talking cloud. And Victoria asked 2 follow-up questions and offered a structural analysis of why clouds in dreams typically represented unresolved logistical problems, and Lily said, That makes sense, actually. And James kept his eyes on his plate and let the morning be what it was. After breakfast, when Lily had gone to get dressed and the plates were stacked in the sink, Victoria stood at the counter beside James, and they washed up the way they'd learned to. She dried, he washed. They moved without negotiating it, and for a while, neither of them said anything. Then she said, I need to tell Richard Yates that I'm extending the arrangement. James handed her a plate. What reason are you giving him? I haven't decided yet. She dried the plate, set it on the stack. Possibly that the penthouse still needs work. Does it? No. She took the next plate. But he doesn't need to know that yet. James turned to look at her. She was looking at the sink with the smallest possible version of a smile, the kind that was really just a slight adjustment of the mouth, barely visible, the kind that cost her nothing and meant everything because she wasn't performing it for anyone. Victoria, he said. She looked at him. You're going to have to tell the board eventually. I know. And HR. I know. And probably Reginald Marsh, who is going to feel very satisfied about being right. She looked at him with an expression that was deeply unamused, and also underneath that completely at peace. I am aware of that. Okay, James said, just making sure. She handed him the last dried plate and folded the dish towel with the precision she brought to everything. She set it on the counter. Then she turned to face him fully, which she did when she was about to say something she had decided to say and was not going to qualify. 3 weeks ago, I wrote a memo with 6 rules, she said. I want to revise Rule 5. He looked at her. Which one was Rule 5? Miss Hale remains employer. Mr. Calloway remains employee. He waited. It's factually accurate, she said. It will remain factually accurate, and we'll navigate that carefully and deliberately the way you said. She held his gaze. But it is no longer the most important thing on the list. James looked at her for a moment. What's the most important thing on the list? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the refrigerator at the accumulated small archive of Lily's sticky notes, the 6-year-old's crayon dispatches about love and breakfast preferences, and the emotional lives of stuffed animals, and at the bottom, in slightly newer yellow, Tori. Don't forget, you are nice and smart, and we like you here. That, she said. James followed her gaze to the note, then back to her. That's not a rule, he said. No, she agreed. It's better than a rule. Lily came back down the hallway in her school clothes, with Gerald under her arm, and her backpack on listing slightly to the left, the way she always did when she hadn't tightened the straps. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked between the two of them with 6-year-old precision. Are you guys okay? She asked. Yeah, James said. We're good. Lily examined them both for another moment with the thoroughness she applied to new information. Then she apparently concluded that the data was satisfactory because she went to the refrigerator, pulled off a fresh Post-it note from the pad. Jams kept on the counter, picked up the crayon she kept behind the fruit bowl without explanation. and wrote something with the focused intensity of someone drafting an important document. She stuck it to the refrigerator. She picked up her backpack, adjusted it, and said, "Ready, Daddy?" to James without ceremony. James looked at the note. "Today is a good day because we are all here." He stood in the kitchen for a moment, with the weight of that sentence sitting in his chest. Its complete, uncomplicated accuracy, the way only a 6-year-old could find the exact center of a thing without trying. He looked at Victoria. She was looking at the note with her hand over her mouth. Not crying this time, not quite just holding something in that was too big to name and too true to argue with. "Come on," James said. "I'll drop you at the office." Victoria lowered her hand. She picked up her bag. She straightened, and the composure was back. But it was a different kind now. Not a wall, but a bearing. Not armor, but posture. The difference between protecting yourself from the world and simply being prepared to move through it. "I can take the car," she said. "I know," James said. "Come anyway." She looked at him, then at Lily, who was already at the door waiting with the patience of someone who had somewhere to be. "Okay," Victoria said. They left the apartment together, the three of them, in the morning, with Lily between them, asking Gerald whether clouds could drive cars, and Victoria saying that was technically a fluid dynamics question, and James saying, "It's too early for fluid dynamics," and Lily saying, "It's never too early, Daddy," which was something she had clearly picked up from Victoria and was already deploying with confidence. The elevator took them down. The lobby door opened onto the morning. The city was already moving the way cities do, indifferent and constant, and full of ordinary things that turn out on closer examination to be extraordinary. James locked the building door behind them, and the temporary arrangement that had started with a corporate memo and a spare room and 6 rules written in the precise hand of a woman who believed that structure could hold anything, that arrangement was over. What replaced it didn't have a name yet, but it had a kitchen table. It had a refrigerator full of sticky notes. It had a 6-year-old who had decided with the unshakable authority of someone who asked the real questions that this was simply how things were now. And it had 2 people who had spent 3 weeks trying to stay on their respective sides of a line and had finally looked down and realized the line had been gone for a long time, and that what they'd built in the space where it used to be was something neither of them had planned for, and both of them had, without knowing it needed. Not a merger, not an arrangement, not a performance for a boardroom, or a framework on a legal pad, or a story about a slate blue book in a bookstore that never existed. Just this. Just here. Just the absolute, ordinary, irreversible truth of 2 people who had accidentally built a life together, while trying very hard not to, and had the good sense finally to stop pretending they hadn't.